will while away many days and nights under the cover, or under the covers, of Polly's house. His high-minded ethics apparently don't extend to monogamy either, for by this time Dutch is married to a sweet-faced 19-year-old former hat-check girl named Frances. Frances has already borne the Dutchman a daughter and is soon to deliver him a son. She puts up with Arthur's shenanigans and prowling and accepts it dutifully as part of the life. Besides, he isn't all bad. In fact, Arthur can be quite sweet and doting. Being a fugitive has also given him a chance to indulge in one of his other great passions, reading. And when he isn't frolicking with the call girls, Dutch might be found at home reading aloud to Frances in bed.
He was a very literate and well-read person. He read Shakespeare, Dickens, Plato.
Dutch has a voracious appetite for knowledge and tries to make up for his lack of education through reading. He reads everything, from novels to science to medical texts to history. He is particularly fascinated by Napoleon and relates strongly to the figure of the tragic emperor. Dutch even reads a manual on English grammar and tells a group of reporters, "Hey fellas, when you write this up, don't forget to split my infinitives." It may not be difficult for Dutch to stay underground during these early years of the Depression, but by 1935, public opinion is changing. FDR is in the White House, and the federal government is cracking down.
The evils of gang war, gambling, vice, political corruption, and organized crime can be eliminated from the American scene.
J. Edgar Hoover and his FBI G-men have recently become heroes after gunning down John Dillinger in Chicago. And the Treasury Department has stunned everyone by putting Capone away. Now the Secretary of the Treasury, Henry Morgenthau, turns his attention to Dutch Schultz.
My father thought he was just flaunting the law. He called Hoover and he called LaGuardia and said, "We've all got to work together. Treasury agents, FBI, New York City police, and find this bum."
The action is swift. Hoover names Dutch Schultz public enemy number one within the Bureau, and both he and LaGuardia pursue Dutch with new vigor. Dutch can feel the heat and knows it's just a matter of time.
I think he realized it was a coordinated effort to find him, and that they would find him. I mean, you know, a man that lived the way he did in his lifestyle, if people really wanted to find him, they were going to find him.
Finally, Dutch decides to face the music and ceremoniously surrenders to local law officers in Albany. For the first time since he was a teenager, Dutch spends a week in jail awaiting a hearing and prepares for his trial in Syracuse.
Arriving to face the jury in New York was Arthur Flegenheim Wright, more famous or infamous as Dutch Schultz, prohibition mobster and beer baron.
The trial in Syracuse is a real cliffhanger. The government has prepared a meticulous case detailing Dutch's enormous income and expenses, and calling the few witnesses brave or stupid enough to testify against him. But the jury deliberates for only a day and a half before emerging completely deadlocked. Dutch is exuberant over the hung jury, but the celebration won't last long. The government announces that it will retry the case in the tiny upstate hamlet of Malone.
It was probably a little bit like the day that Babe Ruth came to town. When Babe Ruth came to town, they had a parade for him, and I don't believe we had one for Dutch Schultz, but he was a very prominent figure from the city.
Dutch decides to spend some time in Malone before the trial. He wants to do some pre-trial publicity, meet the townsfolk, and attempt to buy their loyalty.
He came here, as I recall, 4 or 5 days before the trial was to commence. He immediately started going around to various restaurants and bars, ingratiating himself.
Any place he went, if it was had to spend $1, it'd be 10 or something like that. I was going in cigars, and he had just finished getting his cigars, and he picking them up at the counter, and he threw down a bill, and he walked out. And all I can recall is the man in the cigar picked up the bill and he said, "Gosh, I wish I had more customers like that."
But after a few days, the judge decides to throw Dutch in jail for the course of the trial.
He was in the jail and he was brought under guard, but very, very nice guard. to the baseball games and was a guest at the baseball games.
Of course, Dutch doesn't rely solely on his charm and good looks for his defense. He also adds 2 local attorneys to his formidable defense team.
My dad was hired to handle Schultz's defense at the trial here in Malone. My father knew he was a very undesirable character, but he was obviously a very bright man. He just couldn't help but feel it was too bad he got pointed in that direction.
The trial itself is a dry 2-week parade of facts and figures through the stifling July heat. Then finally, on August 2nd, 1935, after 28 hours of deliberation, the jury returns. The courtroom is jam-packed with press and onlookers as tension fills the room. The Dutchman stands stoically as the verdict is read. Not guilty.
And the next thing we heard out there was the shouting and the clapping that came from the courthouse. But that lasted about that long, because that's about as long as it took the judge to pound his gavel, which we heard very, very clearly outside. And that's when he delivered his reprimand to the jury.
Before I discharge you, he says, I will have to say that your verdict is such that it shakes the confidence of law-abiding people in integrity and truth. It will be apparent to all who have followed the evidence in this case that you have reached a verdict based not on the evidence, but on some other reason. Dutch's victory in court comes as a big surprise to a lot of folks in the city who had written him off. And no one is more surprised than Dutch's old pal and second-in-command, Bo Weinberg.
For a long time, Lucky Luciano had cast covetous eyes on the Dutchman's policy empire. And so he entered into negotiations with Bo Weinberg in order to take it over.
Schultz gave him a gift, a special pair of cement boots.
It's a warm summer night as an anonymous boat floats along the murky waters of the East River. On board, Dutch Schultz is watching his old pal Bo squirm and beg for his life as the cold cement hardens around his ankles. Is it tough for Dutch rubbing out his old friend? Or does Dutch enjoy watching him suffer?
As they lower Bo Weinberg over the side, the Dutchman tips his hat. So long, Bo. Have a nice swim.
By the end of 1935, things are starting to unravel for the Dutchman. He has beat the government fair and square in Malone, only to find himself banished from New York City by an angry Mayor LaGuardia. So he sets up shop across the river in Newark and begins to try and make a comeback. Being in exile is difficult for business, but even tougher is being apart from Francis and the son that she has given birth to while he was in Malone. It must bring back memories of when his father ran out on the family when he was at the vulnerable age of 14. Now, as he tries to rebuild his empire from New Jersey, like Napoleon on the island of Elba, Dutch may consider other ways of life. I want to settle down and be a plain citizen and be given a chance to earn a living, he says. I want to be Arthur Flegenheimer and forget there ever was a Dutch Schultz. That bird has too much trouble.
Things were closing in on Dutch Schultz by then, from all sides. The other gangsters saw that he was vulnerable. That it was only a matter of time before they'd get him. They're like piranhas. Any one of them who's seen as vulnerable and weak will be devoured by others.
Even as Dutch is fighting for survival, his battles in court are still far from over. Thomas Dewey refuses to let him go and indicts Dutch yet again for tax evasion, this time on a state rap.
He definitely considered it a personal vendetta on the part of Dewey, and he wanted to return the favor. He wanted to launch his own mortal vendetta against Dewey.
Dutch is furious with what he considers Dewey's harassment, but with nowhere else to turn, he is forced to turn to his enemies and makes an unprecedented appearance at a meeting of the National Crime Syndicate.
For Dutch Schultz to attend a meeting of the National Syndicate would have been a scene filled with tension. Here was an outsider, someone with whom they generally preferred not to deal with.
Dutch lays his case before the committee. Dewey is a menace and a threat to them all. Therefore, he proposes that Dewey must be killed. It's an outrageous proposal, just the kind of bloody diplomacy they've come to expect from Dutch. But the proposal is considered and it's put to a vote.
To me, the deciding vote was Lepke and Luciano. Killing Dewey would be very bad for business.
They realized that if the special prosecutor was killed, I think as one of them said, the whole world will come down on us.
The vote on the Dewey hit is a resounding no. Dutch is livid and storms out of the meeting vowing to kill Dewey himself and promising to do the deed within 48 hours. Little does he know that with his pronouncement of his intent to kill Dewey, Dutch effectively signs his own death warrant.
Louis Lepke Buckhalter said, we have to kill Dutch before he can kill Dewey. Now, it also happened to work out to their business interests. They get rid of this wild man who's going to bring a lot of heat on them, and two, they get control of Dutch's empire.
They figured, hey, why kill Dewey and then suffer in the pocket when we can hit Dutch, take all, we'll gain by taking him out. Understand? We're going to gain.
The contract is given to two of the top guns at the infamous Murder Incorporated, Mendy Weiss and Charlie the Bug Workman, gruesome triggermen with countless corpses to their credit. It's the contract of a lifetime, a glamour job to kill the Dutchman. While in Newark, Dutch has begun conducting most of his business at the Palace Chop House. He favors this particular establishment because it is long and narrow, and with his table situated at the back, it makes it particularly difficult to sneak up on him. But on the night of October 23, 1935, the Dutchman's back is going to need watching. It's late in the evening, and Dutch has already taken meetings with his lawyers, bail bondsmen, and wife Frances at his table in the back of the chop house. He's just now getting down to the business of going over the figures from his troubled rackets with his faithful sidemen, Otto Abadaba Berman, Abe Landau, and Lulu Rosencrantz, when the assassins arrive. The killers march into the chop house with guns drawn, stopping only to absently pump a bullet into a guy in the men's room before they burst into Dutch's inner sanctum and open fire. Bullets are flying. Dutch's men go down. But as the bodies hit the ground and the dust settles, the assassins are shocked to discover that Dutch is not among them. It's then that Charlie the Bug realizes that the guy in the bathroom is none other than Dutch himself.
Rosencrantz, with 5 slugs in him, asked the bartender for change of a quarter so he could use the phone.
Finally, Dutch staggers out of the bathroom clutching a bullet wound in his stomach and drops face down on the table, mortally wounded but still very much alive. Dutch and his men are rushed to Newark County Hospital. Within hours, Abadaba, Abe, and Lulu will all expire.